In a town built on beauty, scandal, and scripted dreams, there lived a secret truth. Beneath the surface of old Hollywood's golden lights were minds sharper than the cameras could capture. These were not just stars. They were inventors, scholars, rebels, and visionaries who outsmarted the very system that tried to typecast them. You've heard their names, seen their faces in black and white flickers, but what you didn't know is that behind the glamour lived brilliance. This isn't the Hollywood you think you know. These are the hidden geniuses of the silver screen. She was the face of Hollywood seduction, Hedy Lamarr, the Austrian-born actress who stunned the world with her beauty. But behind those piercing eyes and velvet screen presence was a mind that most people never bothered to see. While audiences were fixated on her roles in films like Samson and Delilah, Hedy was working on something far more revolutionary than a script. In the midst of World War II, she co-invented a technology that would go on to form the basis of modern Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth. Yes, Hedy Lamarr, the so-called most beautiful woman in the world, helped create frequency-hopping spread-spectrum communication. It was meant to guide torpedoes without enemy interference. The U.S. Navy didn't take it seriously at the time, brushing off the idea from a movie star. But decades later, the world caught up to her genius. She never made a dime from the invention, never got the respect she deserved while she was alive. But today, her legacy isn't just a face on a poster. It's in every smartphone signal, every secure wireless connection. Hedy Lamarr wasn't just ahead of her time. She was building the future in silence, while the world only asked her to smile. James Woods has played some of the sharpest characters in film: slick lawyers, fast-talking hustlers, morally complicated men. But here's the twist. In real life, Woods might be even sharper than the roles he played. With an IQ reportedly north of 180, he scored a perfect 800 on the verbal section of the SAT and studied political science at MIT before Hollywood came calling. That's not a rumor. That's documented fact. He wasn't just book smart, he was fast. Sharp-witted, brutally articulate, and unafraid to go toe-to-toe with anyone, whether on screen or in debate. Woods never leaned on his looks or charm. He leaned on logic, precision, and a deep understanding of human behavior. That intensity made its way into his acting, raw, unpredictable, and always just a little dangerous. But intelligence doesn't always make you beloved in Hollywood. Woods was, and still is, a lightning rod. Controversial, outspoken, and fiercely individual, he never fit the mold. Maybe that's the cost of genius in a place built on illusions. Whatever you think of him, James Woods was never just another actor. He was a brainiac with a bite, a thinker in a sea of dreamers, and he knew it. Marlon Brando didn't just change acting, he detonated it. When he arrived on screen, everything before him started to look like theater. But Brando's brilliance wasn't just in the way he mumbled lines or stared into silence. It was in how he understood people. He didn't just play characters, he became them. And that came from a mind obsessed with truth, psychology, and the raw gears of human behavior. Brando read Freud, spoke passionately about civil rights, and could take apart a scene like a surgeon with a scalpel. He could outthink a director, manipulate a camera with a glance, and vanish inside a performance so completely it felt dangerous. But he was also deeply self-aware. He knew he was a myth being built in real time, and he played that role with as much calculation as any on screen. He was unpredictable, often difficult, sometimes cruel, but behind it all was someone who saw through the Hollywood machine with X-ray vision. He called it out. He mocked it. And he still became the most influential actor of the 20th century. Brando wasn't just talented. He was a rebel genius, too smart to play the game, and too good not to win it anyway. Sterling Hayden looked every inch the Hollywood leading man, towering, rugged, the perfect face for a war film or a western. But what the studios didn't count on was that he didn't care. Not about the fame, not about the glamour, not even about the money. Because Hayden wasn't just an actor. He was a sailor, a spy, a wanderer, and maybe most of all, a thinker who rejected everything Hollywood tried to hand him. During World War II, he joined the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, and carried out covert missions across Europe. After the war, he was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. He gave names. Then, he publicly, bitterly regretted it. The shame haunted him, and he turned inward, writing, sailing, and running as far from stardom as the ocean would take him. His memoir, Wanderer, isn't just a celebrity book, it's a confession, a philosophical journey, a man ripping the mask off fame and staring hard at who he really was. In it, he writes not like a movie star, but like a poet with something to prove. Sterling Hayden didn't fit in Hollywood because he didn't want to. He was chasing something else: truth, freedom, and a life too big to fit on screen. To most, Vincent Price was the voice of horror, a man with a chilling laugh, a ghostly presence, and a face made for shadows. But behind the iconic roles in films like House of Wax and The Tingler was one of the most cultured, articulate, and intellectually curious minds in Hollywood. Price wasn't just an actor. He was a classically trained art historian, a gourmet chef, and a man who saw the world through the lens of curiosity, not just cinema. He studied at Yale and the Courtauld Institute of Art in London, with dreams of becoming a curator before the screen came calling. And even when horror made him a legend, he never stopped being a scholar. He collected art, lectured on it, and published books about it. When he wasn't filming, he was writing cookbooks, serious, intricate ones, and advocating for arts education with a passion that never felt performative. Price was a man who could recite Shakespeare in one breath and explain surrealism in the next. He made horror elegant, made intelligence accessible, and never seemed to feel the need to prove his worth, because he knew exactly who he was. In a town full of manufactured personas, Vincent Price was the real thing, a true Renaissance man who happened to love a good scream. Richard Burton didn't just speak lines, he made them thunder. His voice could shake a theater, but his mind was even louder. Born into poverty in Wales, Burton clawed his way out through books, language, and an obsession with perfection. He read constantly, Shakespeare, philosophy, history, and memorized passages with ease. Words weren't just his tools, they were his weapons, his armor, his way out. He could recite entire plays from memory. Directors didn't just cast him for his looks or his presence, they trusted him to bring weight to every syllable. Offstage, he was just as sharp. Witty, self-critical, and deeply philosophical, Burton kept journals filled with insights and raw introspection. He struggled with fame, with love, with addiction, but never with intelligence. That was always burning at full force. In a Hollywood often content with surface, Burton brought depth. Real, raw, learned depth. His affairs were legendary, especially with Elizabeth Taylor, but so was his mind. He knew the price of brilliance, and he paid it. Richard Burton wasn't just a great actor. He was a man who wrestled with his own mind every day, and still made it look effortless. Claudette Colbert had a smile that lit up the screen, and a voice that could slice through dialogue like silk through air. She was elegance incarnate, graceful, witty, perfectly styled. But beneath the glamour was a woman with a razor-sharp mind and a business sense that rivaled any executive in the studio system. In an industry that often treated women as disposable, Colbert took control and kept it. She was one of the first actresses to manage her own image down to the frame. She demanded to be shot from her good side, negotiated her own contracts, and always made sure the camera served her, not the other way around. Off camera, she invested wisely, lived frugally, and steered her career like a seasoned strategist. She didn't need to be loud to be powerful. She let intelligence and control speak for her. Colbert didn't just survive Hollywood's golden age. She thrived in it by outthinking it. She was never a studio puppet. She was the hand that pulled the strings behind the curtain. And though she rarely talked about her intellect, every decision she made told the story for her. Claudette Colbert was more than a leading lady. She was a quiet force, smart, deliberate, and always one move ahead. Peter Ustinov wasn't just one of Hollywood's most versatile actors. He was a full-blown polymath, a man who seemed to live in 5 dimensions at once. Actor, director, playwright, novelist, satirist, diplomat, Ustinov didn't just dabble, he excelled. He spoke multiple languages fluently, could mimic accents like breathing, and moved between stage and screen with effortless command. He was a master of both performance and perception. But what really set him apart was his mind, a restless, curious, deeply humane intellect that could move from comedy to world politics without missing a beat. He once said, "Comedy is simply a funny way of being serious," and that's exactly how he lived. He served as a UNICEF ambassador, sat on global panels, and used his fame not for self-glorification, but to elevate conversation. Ustinov wasn't just respected, he was revered, not only in Hollywood but on the world stage. He could make a room laugh with one breath and make them think with the next. He didn't seek out roles, he created worlds. And in an industry obsessed with image, Peter Ustinov reminded us what brilliance looked like when it wore 1,000 faces, but always spoke with one voice, his own. Jean Tierney was breathtaking. That was the word most people used when they saw her, breathtaking. But while the world admired the face on the screen, it rarely stopped to notice the woman behind it, a woman of sharp intelligence, multilingual fluency, and a depth of thought shaped by both privilege and profound personal pain. She spoke French fluently, read widely, and had a deep appreciation for art and history. Her mind was as refined as her beauty, but she rarely broadcast it. Tierney didn't need to be loud to be bright. She observed, she listened, she processed. And when life dealt her unimaginable challenges, including a battle with severe mental health issues, she met them with courage and clarity. Her autobiography didn't just tell her story, it revealed her soul, unguarded and unflinching. Jean Tierney's genius wasn't in spectacle, it was in subtlety. In her ability to endure, to reflect, and to come out the other side not as a starlet, but as a fully realized woman. She was often cast as the ethereal ideal, but in truth, she was something far rarer, a deeply intelligent soul quietly navigating a world that never expected her to be more than beautiful. Anthony Quinn had the kind of presence that filled the screen before he even spoke. Powerful, earthy, magnetic. But what most didn't realize was that behind that physical force was an artist's soul and an intellectual hunger that never stopped reaching. Born in Mexico and raised in poverty, Quinn started with nothing but raw talent and relentless drive. He wasn't just acting to perform, he was acting to survive and to understand. He studied architecture under Frank Lloyd Wright, who saw in him not just a student, but a true creative mind. Quinn painted, sculpted, and wrote with the same intensity he brought to every role. His art, on canvas and in clay, was raw, bold, and deeply personal. He didn't separate his creative lives, they fed each other. His portrayal of Zorba the Greek wasn't a performance, it was a philosophy. Live fully, think deeply, feel everything. Quinn never played shallow. Even in the roles where he said little, there was a gravity to him, a knowing. He didn't intellectualize to impress. He felt his way through knowledge, through culture, through identity. He was an immigrant, an artist, a father, a rebel, and above all, a thinker. Anthony Quinn didn't fit into one box because his mind refused to be boxed in. Greta Garbo didn't just play mystery, she was mystery. The moment she appeared on screen, time seemed to slow down. There was a gravity to her, a silence that said more than 1,000 lines. But behind those famous words, "I want to be alone," wasn't coldness. It was depth. Garbo wasn't retreating from fame out of vanity. She was choosing solitude in a world that never stopped watching, never stopped demanding. She read philosophy, history, and literature. She traveled under false names just to see the world without being seen. Fluent in several languages, she spent her post-Hollywood years in quiet contemplation, walking, reading, thinking. No entourages, no headlines, just the rare kind of intelligence that finds more meaning in silence than in spotlights. She turned down interviews, awards, and press, not out of arrogance, but because she valued her mind and her peace more than public praise. In an industry addicted to attention, Garbo chose stillness. She left at the peak of her power and never looked back. That takes clarity. That takes strength. And yes, that takes genius. Greta Garbo didn't want to be alone because she had nothing to say. She wanted to be alone because she'd already figured out what most never do. Orson Welles was the kind of genius that doesn't whisper, it roars. By 25, he had already written, directed, and starred in Citizen Kane, a film so revolutionary it reshaped everything Hollywood thought it knew about storytelling. But Welles wasn't just a filmmaker. He was a force of nature, a storm of intellect, ambition, and unrelenting vision. He devoured literature, debated philosophy, and could quote Shakespeare as easily as he breathed. Before Kane, he terrified America with a radio broadcast of War of the Worlds that made people believe the planet was under attack. That wasn't a stunt. That was mastery of media, of emotion, of psychology. He knew how to bend reality using nothing but words and sound. Welles battled studios, sabotaged careers, and refused to play nice with power. And that's what cost him. Hollywood, brilliant as he was, never knew what to do with someone it couldn't control. But Welles didn't fade. He created an exile, found ways around the system, and kept thinking 5 steps ahead. Even unfinished, his work had more weight than most people's polished legacies. Orson Welles wasn't just a genius. He was the blueprint for what genius looks like when it refuses to be edited. The tragedy is Hollywood tried. The triumph is they couldn't. Barbara Stanwyck never asked for attention. She earned it. On screen, she could be anything. A tough-as-nails femme fatale, a heartbroken mother, a sharp-tongued screwball heroine. Off-screen, she was even more impressive, a self-made woman who rose from nothing, taught herself everything, and outworked everyone. She had no formal education beyond high school, but you'd never know it. Stanwyck was self-taught, self-reliant, and always 10 steps ahead. She read scripts like they were legal contracts, analytically, strategically, with absolute clarity. Directors trusted her instincts. Writers respected her timing. She had no patience for fluff and no need for approval. Stanwyck wasn't loud, but she was direct. She didn't play games, she played the long game. And she won. What made her brilliant wasn't just her intelligence, it was her discipline. While others chased fame, she built a legacy. While others posed for gossip columns, she studied human behavior, scene by scene, emotion by emotion. In a system that chewed people up and spat them out, Barbara Stanwyck stood tall, sharp, and absolutely unbreakable. Not because she followed the rules, but because she understood the system better than anyone and made it work for her. Paul Robeson was more than a star. He was a force, intellectual, cultural, political. He sang with a voice that shook the rafters and acted with a presence that held time still. But what truly made him extraordinary was his mind. Robeson was a scholar, a lawyer, a linguist, and an activist. He graduated from Rutgers as class valedictorian, earned a law degree from Columbia, and was fluent in over a dozen languages. And that was just the beginning. He could have lived a comfortable life as a performer. His voice alone could have guaranteed that. But Robeson chose a harder path. He used his fame as a platform, speaking out against racism, fascism, and colonialism when it was dangerous to do so. He was blacklisted, surveilled, and silenced. His passport was revoked. Stages were closed to him. But even then, he never backed down. Robeson's genius wasn't only in what he knew, it was in how he used that knowledge. He believed that intelligence had a responsibility, and he carried that weight with relentless dignity. He didn't just perform in history, he confronted it. Paul Robeson wasn't just ahead of his time. He was what time would eventually catch up to. A mind, a voice, and a soul that refused to be muted. John Houseman was never the loudest man in the room, but he was almost always the smartest. A producer, writer, actor, and educator, Houseman made a career out of sharpening other people's brilliance. He co-founded the Mercury Theater with Orson Welles and helped stage the infamous War of the Worlds broadcast. But while Welles was the storm, Houseman was the architect, measured, strategic, brilliant in the background. He wasn't chasing stardom. He was building institutions. He shaped the future of American acting not just with roles, but with rules, at Juilliard, where he trained some of the greatest performers of the modern age. When he finally stepped into the spotlight as an actor late in life, he won an Oscar for The Paper Chase, playing a stern, cerebral professor. It wasn't a stretch. It was close to who he was. Houseman believed in rigor, clarity, and craft. He saw intelligence not as a spotlight, but as a responsibility to elevate, to mentor, to challenge. He may not be a household name like the stars he supported, but his fingerprints are everywhere. In the voices he shaped, in the standards he set. John Houseman was the quiet genius in the wings, always thinking, always building, always one move ahead. In the golden age of Hollywood, the lights were bright and the cameras never stopped rolling, but not all brilliance was made for the screen. Behind the iconic faces, beyond the studio contracts and crafted personas, lived minds that challenged, created, invented, and endured. These weren't just actors. They were thinkers, rebels, architects of culture. Some changed the world. Others changed the way we see it. In an industry built on illusion, they carried truth. In a business that rewarded conformity, they chose curiosity. And while fame may have faded, their intellects left marks time can't erase. Genius doesn't always announce itself. It sometimes moves quietly, strategically, or in the shadow of a spotlight meant for someone else. But it's there. It always was. So next time you watch those old films, don't just look at the performances. Look through them. And remember, the real story sometimes lives off screen.